rest of the 19th century and into the 20th century. So as you watch the news coverage from Gettysburg over the next couple days, you probably won't hear about any of these people, but give them a couple of seconds of thought anyway. Thank you. I've been authorized to answer questions if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
I have one. Were regulars paid the same as?
The regulars were paid exactly the same as the volunteers. A private of infantry, $13 a month. Cavalry and artillery, I think they give you $14 a month. That was it. You got a pay raise in '65, up to from 13 up to 15. Don't spend it all in one place, but got to keep a certain perspective here. If you are a farm kid, your family's annual income was probably about $300 a year. So you put it together, especially if you're a young person. It was some cash. Yeah.
What was the difference in enlistment requirements or commitments?
That's a good question. If you enlisted in the state volunteers, it was likely that you were going to enlist for, early in the war, as little as 3 months. The standard became 3 years. If you join one of the U.S. regular regiments, that's a 5-year commitment. So that was an important decision to make. If you joined a volunteer regiment, you were quite likely to get a bounty. You could get a local bounty, a state bounty, a county bounty sometimes. Soldiers, by 1864, to get an honest-to-goodness volunteer to come in and sign, if they got all the different bounties that were being offered, might walk out of there with $400. Now, considering I just said that an annual pay for a farm family might be $300, you can see how that would actually be a very positive inducement to make some people make that decision. If you join a United States regular Army unit, welcome to the Army, son. There is no extra bounty that comes with that. So those who joined made an interesting choice. I took a look, especially at the units that fought at Gettysburg, because I'd always been told that they were just filled with Irish and German immigrants who just didn't know any better, and they were recruited right off the immigration ships and that sort of thing. But the number of native-born members who freely enlisted is really quite amazing. John.
Are you taking all of these unknown, unrecognized people and generating any sort of larger hypothesis for a book?
Why, thank you for asking. The question was, am I doing anything with these unknown folks? In the large picture, not yet. These specific ones, I have to give into a commercial here, okay? There is a brand new book out here. If you are a diehard Gettysburg fan, you need to go out tonight and purchase a brand new book, hot off the presses, called A Field Guide to Gettysburg. Myself and Colonel Tom Vossler, U.S. Army retired, we wrote this book, just came out literally a couple weeks ago. And we built it based on a lot of experience with staff rides with other groups that we've had out in the field. And we ask a lot of basic questions about what happened here, who led here, who fought here. But one of the questions that we always get asked is, how many people died here? Numbers only go so far. Now, I could give you the numbers. About half of the regulars that fought at Gettysburg fell at Gettysburg. There's your number. But that doesn't really tell you the story that oftentimes we're most interested in. One of the things that we did for each one of our stops, each one of our 35 stops, is to provide you with at least 2 soldiers you've never heard of before and tell you something about who they were, what they were all about, what happened to their families, and that sort of thing. One of the things that we're learning about right now, I mean, it's something that all of us have had to think about lately, and that's the whole notion about what about those who are left behind when one of our soldiers falls. The Civil War was the first time we tried to deal with that in any substantive way. Early in the war, there was nothing done special for the families of soldiers who fell. The community would feel bad for them. Usually the local church, or maybe there was some kind of a relief collection taken up for them, but there was nothing done systematically. In July of 1862, a year before Gettysburg, the United States Congress passed legislation creating something that they called a pension system. Now, we would recognize that more as survivor benefits, but if you go into those files and see what kinds of affidavits and what kind of evidence is put into these applications, you learn so much more about the commitment of this generation to the cause that they were supporting. There were several kinds of pensions: widows, dependent mothers, minor children, and dependent sisters. Interesting categories. But for each one, you had to, of course, verify that the soldier for whom you were making the claim was formally enlisted. You had to prove your loyalty to the nation. If you were married, if it's a widow's claim, you had to prove your marriage. How do you do that before marriage licenses are used everywhere? That's something to think about. Sometimes they had to get a letter from the minister or the JP that married them. Sometimes they used the family Bible, as long as the justice of the peace could verify that was not a Bible bought yesterday and had all this stuff written in. Sometimes they had an affidavit saying, well, I was at the wedding, and that's all they could do. If you have minor children, how do you prove that they're your children without birth certificates? Doctor's statements, midwife statements, the guy who says, I was with the prospective father out in the next room and I heard the first cries of life from the next room. All kinds of things like that. And you learn so much more about when you hear the problems that unfortunately some folks have today dealing with Veterans Administration. And then you flash back and you say, yep, Civil War had different problems, but the same kinds of obstacles that existed. But what you have to remember about the Civil War folks is that everything that they did to try to get a pension, they initiated. There's no casualty assistance team. There's nobody that comes and informs you of what happened to your loved one. There are probably thousands of Civil War families who never knew that they had the option to apply for these sorts of things. But it's those records that give us greater insights into who these people were and the degree of commitment involved. When you realize that you're reading a pension statement for a man who left behind a wife and 5 kids, and that sort of thing. And the stories break your heart. Here's a 19-year-old widow named America. Things like that just really get to you. But ultimately, there's a story there that hasn't been told as well. And that might be a book down the road to take a look just at the policy issues, but then the examples that you need to really flesh out the story. That's where we're getting the ammunition to learn a lot more about these folks. When I'm reading about some of the soldiers that fell at Gettysburg, that were U.S. regulars, and you take a look at their date of enlistment and realize that you're reading 1858, 1860, long before Fort Sumter or anything else, you know that you're dealing with people who had made an interesting decision earlier in their lives to serve the country and finally laid it on the line on July 2nd at Gettysburg.
Okay, I'd like to one more time thank Professor Reardon for a great presentation. And on behalf of the Department of Defense, give you this coin.
Ooh, thank
as
you.
a remembrance. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Our next presentation will be in October, so we have a summer break for presentations. Again, if you want to get on the list, come up and see Doug, please. Thank you.
Cool. All right.
Outstanding.
You had a good one?